Hi everybody, this is Mathew Saville with SLR Lounge. Today I've got a how I shot it video for you, and it is a 15-minute long self-portrait. I just got back from a couple of trips to Joshua Tree and Death Valley, and it is really dang cold out there. I think we averaged 10 to 20 degrees each night of the trip. But I decided to do a 1029 second self-portrait. I don't know what I was thinking. The question is, how on earth do you get a shot like this? And the answer is there are two things you have to tackle when you're going for this. They are exposure and focus. And it's a completely different world when you're trying to photograph by the light of nothing other than a crescent moon. You can't autofocus. You can almost autofocus by the light of a full moon if you have a Nikon D4 or a Canon 6D, but that's a different story for another time. This is a crescent moon, and I have no way to nail this focus by conventional means. So let's get into it. First, I got to gauge my exposure, and what I do is I start by just shooting in the dark, pun intended. I go with my aperture wide open. I'm on a 24 to 70 f2.8, so I'm at f2.8, and I just crank my ISO way up beyond what I would want to actually use. Because what I don't want to do is sit around for 5-minute exposure, a 10-minute exposure, and then be realizing, oh, 15 minutes is what I need. So that's why I'm cranking my ISO way up. I guessed at ISO 6400, 4 seconds at f2.8. And it turned out a little dark. If you see on the histogram, I've got like how many 3, 4, 5 stops of empty histogram there on the bright side of it. So I need to brighten it up. So I tried 10 seconds at ISO 6400. And I kept trying different shots until I got to 8 seconds at ISO 25600. And you can see by this time I was getting kind of angry because I was blurring my camera. I wasn't caring very much about my tripod stability. So I really wanted to get this shot accomplished and get back in my tent. So this is the fastest way to do it, guessing around the 10 to 30 second exposure mark. So now this is going to sound kind of silly, but what you do is you count backwards on your fingers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're going back to kindergarten. So let's try it out. You can count along with me. Don't be embarrassed. If there's anybody in the room, then tell them to leave while you get out your fingers and count. So here's what I mean by counting on your fingers. I want to get to ISO 400 and f4. That's what gives me sharpness. That's what gives me low noise. And that's what gives me the motion in the stars like this. So what do I got to do? Let's count down. One stop from f2.8 to f4. Then from ISO 25600, I'm going to count down, and I'm counting these on my fingers. Remember, I've already got one finger up for this. And then 25600 to 12800, then 6400, then 3200, then 1600, then 800, then 400. And that is 7 stops of exposure that I got to change in my shutter speed. So let's keep your fingers up. You got 7 fingers up. Now count down on your fingers while we go up on the shutter speeds. So from 8 seconds, I'm going to go to 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, and 15 minutes. That's how I nail a 15-minute exposure from an 8-second exposure. And now the next thing that I have to gauge is focus. This is also quite tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see, but I'm going to zoom in live view on my camera while I'm focusing manually. And what you have to do is you have to find a brighter star or a planet like these. This is Orion right here. He's usually bright enough for that. You zoom in to as far as you can go on live view on your camera, and you start by setting your lens to about infinity. If you start zoomed in, there's going to be nothing. But if you start at infinity, you'll be able to make out a little tiny dot that is a star, and you can focus on it manually. Usually, focus for stars is right around the infinity mark on your lens. And the best thing to do is to just memorize where that is for infinity, for stars I mean, and then just set your lens to that each time you need to make an exposure. So I gauge this focus And then basically for the entire rest of the trip, I just set my lens to that same spot, and I nail the stars each time. On the Nikon 2470 f2.8, it just happens to be to the right of the infinity mark on my lens. So that is how you gauge the exposure and focus for a shot like this in near pitch black conditions. And so that's about it. That's how I got this shot in such weird, extreme conditions. Let's go into the develop module really quick just to see what I would do to touch this shot up, kind of give it a little bit of pop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the SLR Lounge workflow presets here for Lightroom 4. And if you don't have those, you can follow along here with the adjustments, but it makes it pretty easy just to have these. So anyways, I start with the standard import, of course. It's not really making that much of a difference. Here you can see the reset. This is just sort of the general defaults that we like to use. But I'm going to go straight to the Vivid Landscape standard import. Bam, there we go. I like the overall vibrance, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the colors, and that's about it. I'm going to make a virtual copy because you can kind of go two different directions with these kinds of photos, because the weird thing is people aren't really used to seeing the moonlight shining on a landscape. There is no real color assigned to this as correct. So you can go in the cold direction and go for kind of that lunar look and give it a cold, dry, gray kind of look to the overall image. And that kind of looks cool. Or let's go to the other image here. You can go in the complete opposite direction, and you can go a little bit warmer, and you can crank your tint up. And I like to call this, as opposed to lunar, I like to call this the Martian type of look. And you can see it's kind of warm, it's kind of purple, pinkish. Maybe I'll dial back on the tint just a little bit, but I really like this warmth, and it's definitely subjective. But anyways, I like the warmth like this. The only other thing that I'm going to do is kind of touch it up a little tiny bit. Maybe give it a little bit more clarity. Maybe bring the highlights down a little bit to kind of give some detail more into this rock here. And then the last thing is I want to do a little bit of vignetting. Now, the SLR Lounge Vivid Standard Color preset gives me a little bit of lens vignetting correction, and I actually don't want that. I want my vignetting to be a little bit more heavier, kind of emphasize the central area of this shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the effects vignetting to accomplish a little bit more gradual, a little bit more subtle type of vignetting here. So let's go down to Special Effects, Artistic Vignetting, Light Radial Vignette, something like that. Bam, right there. And I like the effect vignetting because it gives me a feather like that. I can make it really subtle and make it kind of so that it isn't noticeably vignetted like a hard edge, like a toy camera, but it's kind of got that old, like I shot this on a slide film type look. And so that is what I am going to decide on as the final image right here. Let me hit tab. Let me minimize this. And there you go. That is what I would arrive at as the final shot, final editing for this concept overall. And maybe if I wanted to, I could Photoshop out the airplanes that are passing through here, but I kind of like it. If I were going to hang this in a fancy gallery and give it a fancy name or something, I might title this image, Fleeting Existence or The Passage of Time, something interesting like that. And so I kind of wanted to capture that whole, the passage of time type. This was around the time of the new year. I was really, interested in kind of capturing something that kind of conveys the passage of time. So that's how I decided kind of on this overall shot. So anyways, there you have it. That is how I shot it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this time, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon. All right, take care.